So now that we know how to add integers using these counters, let's talk about subtracting the integers. This is very similar, except instead of following the directions to put more things on the board, they're asking us to take things off. So I'm going to do what I did before, where I'm just going to start out by showing you how I would do this problem, and then I'll explain. So here's what it would look like. I'm adding 6 negatives, and then my directions tell me to take 3 negatives away, so I'm going to cross out 3 of them. That leaves me with 3 left over, which gives me an answer of -3. All right, so how did I do that? Let's take a look. As always, I'm going to look at the numbers that I'm given, and I see that I have a -6 here. I also see that it's asking me to subtract, and I see that I have another negative number over here. So I start with 6 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 negatives. The minus sign or the subtraction sign tells me I am taking away or taking off. And then the number that I'm taking off is 3 negatives. Okay, so what that looks like, I start with 6 negatives, 3, 4, 5, 6. I take off 3 negatives, 1, 2, 3. And I am left with -3. All right, so that one is a pretty simple problem, but it does get a little more complicated, so let's see what happens when things get a little more tricky. Okay, so for this problem, we are going to have to think about 0 pairs again. Before we get started, let's look at what we're given. We start with 3 negatives. This is a subtraction problem, and we are subtracting +1. So start with 3 negatives. 1, 2, 3. Take off 1 positive. Okay, so let's see what happens. I am starting with 3 negatives. Let's put that down. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so it wants us to take off 1 positive, but what I notice on my board is I don't have a positive to take off. So here's where things get a little tricky with the counters. In order to get a positive onto my board that I can take off, I need to add a 0 pair. And I'm going to add a 0 pair here. The trick here is that you can add as many 0 pairs as you want without changing the board, because you're just adding a 0. Okay, so if I wanted to add more of these 0 pairs, I could do that as long as for every plus I have a minus, right? These are all 0 pairs, and I can circle them so you can see them. This is a 0 pair, and this is a 0 pair. I still am starting out with -3, even though I have these 0 pairs on the board. So I only need to add 0 pairs until I see 1 positive that I can take off the board. That's what I'm looking for. So because I have 1 positive on the board that I can take away, now I have my answer. My answer is -4. Okay? This is very tricky to some people. Here's another example. We have 2 minus negative 4. So let's mark this up. I have positive 2. I am subtracting, and I am subtracting negative 4. Okay, let's box it. So we start with 2 positives. The subtraction sign tells me that I am going to take off. Oops. I'm going to take off 4 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's start this out. I need to start with 2 positives. And I need to take off 4 negatives. Now, I do not see any negatives on the negative side, which tells me that I need to start putting in 0 pairs. So every time I add a 0 pair, here, and let me write them off to the side here. These are 0 pairs. I'm going to make sure that every time I add another addition sign, I am also adding another subtraction sign. So here's a 0 pair. Here's another 0 pair. Here's another 0 pair. And here is one more. Okay, now that I've added 0 pairs onto the board, I see that I can take off 4 negatives now. So I'm going to cross those out. I'm crossing out 4 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now I only have one color of counter on the board. And that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 positives, which means my answer is positive 6. All right. This kind of helps explain the trick that some of you already know, that when you subtract a negative, that is the same as adding, and that kind of shows you why that is. Okay, here's one more example. 3 minus 7. Let's mark this up. We have positive 3. This is a subtraction problem, and we're subtracting positive 7. So these directions tell us that we start with positive 3. So start with positive 3. And because this is a subtraction problem, we are going to take off. And the second number is positive 7, so that tells us that we're going to take off 7 positives. 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so let's get this on the board. We start with 3 positives. 1, 2, 3. We need to take off 7 positives. So the problem that I'm running into with my board right now is that I need to take 7 positives off the board, and I don't have 7. So this is a case where I again need to take some 0 pairs and put them down. And I'm just going to add 0 pairs onto the board until I see 7 positives that I can take off. So I added a 0 pair. Now I have 4 positives. Now I have 5 positives. Now I have 6 positives. So I think I only need one more 0 pair to be able to follow these directions. Okay, here are my 0 pairs added. And I need to take off 7 positives from the board. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. All right, that worked out. I put enough 0 pairs onto the board so that I could take away 7 positives, and now I'm left with 4 negatives left over. So my answer is going to be -4. All right, that does it.